Okay, this is going to be Robertson County Corruption Part 2. It's going to be in continuation with the last video, and it's going to move into an event called the Takeover. The Takeover happened February 1st, 1988. And like I said before, it involved a fellow named Eddie Hatch and one of my good friends named Timothy Jacobs. And what we're going to jump into now is going to be a little snippet about how corrupt a place Robertson County actually was and still is.
I had a lot of contacts. So one of our contacts was an old friend of ours who was a DEA and reasonably high up in DEA. And we asked him about Robeson County. And he called us back in a day or so after checking around, and he said, "It is a county that is so treacherous, we will not put one of our agents in there." Hubert Stone, who was the sheriff at the time and had been the sheriff for some time before and some time after that, is very smooth. "Oh, yes, Mr. So-and-so, come in, sit down, and have a cup of coffee. I'm glad you're here. Oh, this is wonderful." But ask him a question or push at all, and he would just deflect it. He was never belligerent, but for example, we asked to interview a certain random people in jail. The jail was a terrible place at that time. They have a new jail now, but and he said, "Well, I'll have to ask the prosecutor, Mr. Britt, if that would be okay." Well, those people are not Britt's prisoners, they're your prisoners. "Well, I know that, Mr. Geiger, but I just want to be careful."
All right, seen that, heard that. Okay. Hubert Stone and Joe Freeman Britt's going to be a through line through most of these stories because those were the corrupted individuals. Now, we talked about Hubert Stone and Kevin Stone and Keith Stone, his two sons that were also deputies up under him. Now we'll talk about Joe Freeman Britt. And lo and behold, the Britt family is going to have a similar hierarchy and control inside of the judicial system, the same way the Stones has got the control inside the sheriff department, the executive branch of Robertson County. Let's get to Joe Freeman Britt. Joe Freeman Britt is a Guinness Book of World Records holder. He is considered by Guinness Book of World Records to be the world's deadliest prosecutor. He prosecuted 40 cases for the death penalty and won. He's got a 97% win rate as a prosecutor. He put the most women on death row of any prosecutor. And at the time he was practicing as district attorney of Robertson County, he put the youngest person in the United States on death row through a conviction of a death penalty case. And at the time he was a 15-year-old boy he put on death row. And we'll speak more about Mr. Britt as time goes on and these videos progress, but now we're going to jump into the next part.
When he came there, he had those maps, and I went to the freezer. We had to think of some place to hide them, and I went to the freezer and moved the frozen foods all where I could, went as far down as we could go, and put those in a plastic. I put them in plastic bags and put them in the freezer and covered them up with the frozen food. And he left, and a little while I got a phone call from my son, a couple hours, and my granddaughter had gone back to Charlotte and called her daddy and told him she didn't know what was going on. But I had borrowed her car, and I'd brought a man to the house, had called me to pick him up, and she knew something was going on, and we had turned out the lights. And of course Jimmy called me and he said, "Mother, what's happening? Who's there with you?" And I said, "Eddie he knew I was involved with Eddie. I said, Eddie's here with me. And he got so up in the air with me. He said, Mother, I thought you knew better. He said, all the people that's being killed in Robeson County and you don't know who's killing them. He said, don't you know it could happen to you?
I was not liked by law enforcement. And I guess when this got out about me having these maps, I just gave them what they figured to go ahead. They could do what they wanted to with me.
In fact, I'm not even sure what sort of advice we told him other than you need to be very careful about thinking that you can seek refuge with the federal authorities because you feel that the sheriff and the county and local authorities are involved. Our experience in this other case is you may not be safe to run with that information to the federal authorities. And to be careful because we knew of killings and bombings, and it was, you know, it's a serious money and serious business and serious consequences for people who wanted to expose that stuff.
Hatcher was warned by friends that he was being followed by Kevin Stone, the sheriff's deputy who had killed Jimmy Earl Cummings. Isolated in his apartment, Hatcher plotted a dramatic response.
Okay, we seen that and we heard that. So now, the next step from that, I'm not going to show the video, but it was the actual takeover. The takeover happened, like I said, February 1st, 1988. Early in the morning, Timothy Jacobs, who was 19, and Eddie Hatcher, who was 30 at the time, entered into the Robesonian. The Robesonian is the local newspaper. And the two carried handguns and sawed-off shotguns. Early that morning, they went in and rounded up all of their employees and herded them all into one room and held the building siege. And they refused to leave, and they were going to hold out until they had 4 demands that they wanted to be met. First off, all the unsolved murders in Robeson County being investigated. Second, the law enforcement being investigated for murdering people as well as drug dealing. The third part was a black guy by the name of Billy McKellar, died very recently, like a month before, in the county jail, and they wanted that murder specifically investigated. And the last and least demand was not to be turned over to the local authorities, that another agency come in and take custody of them when they surrendered. And the fellow was running the chief of staff for the governor at the time, Jim Hunt. His name was Philip Kirk, and Philip Kirk negotiated the surrender of Timothy and Eddie and agreed to the demands. Well, we all know what happens when government investigates itself. And the police that the state government's over is the SBI, and we already seen in the videos that the SBI was complacent, if not in an accessory form, helping the Robeson County Sheriff's Department and what they were doing. So there's no wrongdoing was ever found on any of these occasions. So now, not only did that happen, but they turned themselves in, and now they're facing not state charges, but federal charges. Because when entering, one, they had sawed-off shotguns, which is a federal crime, and they told everybody that was inside that they had the doors wired with hand grenades. So they didn't have explosives, but they got charged for explosives anyway. So now we get to the introduction to the lawyers and the trial.
Telephone call, and I don't remember if it was from some member of the support crew or whatever, asking us if we would be interested in this case, and we said, yeah, great. It sounds absolutely fascinating. And we went down to Robeson County, and it was sort of an amazing experience. I mean, look, we Bill Kunstler had traveled all through the South in the 1960s. He'd seen crummy, little, corrupt towns presided over by Yahoo redneck sheriffs. I mean, that was sort of the motif of much of the 60s, but none of us had ever seen anything like Robeson County. The statistic, I think, that stuck out most starkly in our minds was that Robeson County had a higher per capita murder rate than El Salvador. And this was at a time when the movement in El Salvador was at its peak. The fighting was the most intense. Death squads drove through the streets with impunity. And they had a higher murder rate than El Salvador. And we were absolutely amazed at that whole situation down there.
All right, well, that shows you Kunstler and Kuby, which is a big civil rights type law firm from New York State, New York City to be exact. And actually, but they beat the trial. Eddie and Timothy were both found not guilty on all charges, and the jury of their peers. But, well, being that they were found not guilty, they jumped back on the horse. They got back out there and started campaigning. They wrote a petition to get rid of not only the sheriff, but get rid of the DA. But the fact of the matter is, you had to turn the petition into the to the district attorney. So once again, it's government investigating itself, and through that, they began to get candidates to run for office, because there was a lot of offices that no minorities had held in Robeson County up to this point, up to 1988, up to that point. There's public offices that no minority ever held. So the grassroots movement had started, but there was darkness looming ahead, and the fellas they didn't see it coming.
And it appeared to us that the reason people in Robeson County weren't doing democracy was intimidation.
The district attorney, Joe Freeman Britt, started making statements to the effect that he was opening the investigation of the takeover, and that he was investigating a conspiracy in the takeover. Now, I knew, because I had read all the FBI and SBI reports and ATF reports, I knew that they had already thoroughly investigated the question of conspiracy and found that, as was the truth, there wasn't a conspiracy. Eddie and Timmy had done this on their own. And that was pretty well established. I also got information about the investigation that they were carrying out.
Well, I think there's some conspiracy behind it.
For what purpose?
Benefit themselves sometimes, other people.
SBI agents were going and talking to people, not about a conspiracy in the takeover, but about the organization that was going on at the time. And they were doing it in a harassing and intimidating manner.
The State Bureau of Investigation began to, quote, investigate state charges that may arise from the takeover. And they made it a big point to announce in the newspapers that they were looking at February the 1st from the perspective of conspiracy. That meant whoever may have been even talking with, or maybe at that time, after the fact, talking with Eddie or Timothy, may be involved in some criminal prosecution. So it had the effect of chilling out the petition drive. It was harassing the people in response for exercising their First Amendment rights. Then there was, well, we may do an indictment, may do a state court indictment. They did, in fact, return indictments for, it seemed like it was 14 multiple counts of kidnapping for the very same incident now, that the people had been gone to trial, faced 2 weeks of trial, and found not guilty.
All right, well, ultimately, both Eddie and Timothy were found guilty. Well, they pled. Timothy, during this time, 18, 19-year-old man, he could still go into juvenile. He could still go into a juvenile program. And Timothy ended up getting, I think, 3 years for the state charges, which like I say, we all know federal, you get tried federal and then you get tried state. That's a double jeopardy, but you know, somehow it went through corruption. But Timothy ended up getting 3 years, and I think he ended up mostly getting probation. But unfortunately, Eddie, he got, I think, eight years. Well, he got 11 years. He ended up serving 7. Everybody thought he would end up serving 3, but through a series of events inside prison, he caught more time and gotten different scrapes and you know, things like of that nature. And through all accounts, one warden actually put a hit out on Eddie, and he was almost murdered. Right in front of the camera, several inmates stabbed Eddie right in front of a camera, and right in front of an occupied office as well. And this is in prison. Who runs around prison scot-free? And I mean, he had to actually crawl into an office, and then he ended up surviving. But sadly, even upon release, Eddie, he never did get back to where he was in the beginning. And unfortunately, he succumbed to a disease, and as well as more charges and more things happened in his life. And you know, not to say what he did short, and not to say some of the things he did change, because he definitely brought about change. Because eventually in 1996, Hubert Stone was voted out, and they voted in a Native American, which would have been the first Native American sheriff of Robeson County, Glenn Manor, which we can't really celebrate Glenn Manor as much as we would want to, because something we're going to see in videos to come. But this is a staging point and an airing out, so to speak, of people seeing a light on a lot of things that was happening in Robeson County. Because before the takeover, people heard whispers and seen shadows of things, but they really never knew. But this shined a bright light on the dirty things that was going on in Robeson County. And I got to salute, I got to salute Eddie, and I definitely got to salute my man Timothy Jacobs. Timothy's not doing so well these days. You know, Eddie's passed on, but Timothy's still around, and I do hope Timothy writes a memoir at the very least that everybody can see the steps. Because I mean, I'm not doing the story justice, but I'm doing a story to do a story. I'm not going in depth on their story, so their story can be told. And I just want to thank them guys, and I thank everybody for watching. See you again.